I hope you'll find it engaging, inspiring person of the U.S. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm the Reverend Mike Schenemeyer, Executive Director of the United Church of Christ HIV and AIDS Network, and the Chairperson of the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition. Since 2014, the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition has hosted a faith conference in advance of the U.S. Conference on AIDS. On behalf of the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Conference, welcome to today's Faith Conference. And because this event is happening on World AIDS Day, we are integrating our Interfaith World AIDS Day observance with today's conference. We will feature voices expressing lessons learned, prayers, an HIV update, music and artistic expression, a call to join actions, and make commitments for ending the HIV epidemic. I hope you'll find it engaging, inspiring, and even challenging, as together we uplift people living with and affected by HIV, and the role of people of faith, faith leaders, and faith communities as an integral part of the HIV response. We begin today's conference by honoring the indigenous ancestors and a land acknowledgement. Wherever we are, the land that surrounds us is part of who we are, and it reflects our histories. The U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition honors and respects the diverse indigenous peoples connected to the various lands where the elements of this conference have been prepared and where people are gathered to view and participate in the event are located. I particularly honor and respect the people, elders, and ancestors, past, present, and future, of the indigenous peoples where I am located, the peoples that inhabited and continue to inhabit what is now defined as Cleveland, Ohio, on the southern shore of what is now called Lake Erie, at the mouth of the Cuyahoga River. It is a land originally stewarded by the Wyandot, Delaware, Shawnee, Ottawa, Miami, Eel River, Wea, Chippewa, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Piankashaw, Kaskaskia, Mingo, Seneca, and Ojibwa people. I honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who lived here and cared for it. I acknowledge and offer deep gratitude to the land we occupy and the water that supports us, and I invite you to join me, wherever you are, in acknowledging with gratitude the land and ancestors, offering respect and gratitude. Let us recognize the genocide, forceful removal, and displacement of the peoples whose lands and territories were stolen from them. May all who gather for this faith conference learn more about the injustices and histories of the indigenous peoples of what is now called North America, and act in solidarity to protect and honor their histories and people.
Following is a short instruction on loving kindness meditation. Let us sit comfortably in a secluded place. To start with, we should review the danger in hate and advantage in patience, because hate must be abandoned and patience must be attained in the cultivation of loving kindness. We cannot abandon unseen dangers or attain unknown advantages, such as stated in one of the Buddhist scriptures. Hatred leads to blindness, loss of vision, and lack of knowledge. It is obstructive to wisdom, aligned with distress, and does not lead to nibbana, or enlightenment. Now, let us begin the meditation on loving kindness. First of all, loving kindness should be cultivated only towards ourselves. Doing it repeatedly, thus, may I be free from suffering, may I be happy, or may I keep myself free from enmity, affliction, or anxiety, and live happily. May I be free from suffering and be happy. May I keep myself free from enmity, affliction, anxiety. May I live happily. And let us pervade ourselves with loving kindness. And next, let us cultivate loving kindness toward a dear person in a way beginning with, may this friend of mine be happy and free from suffering. And may this friend of mine be happy and free from suffering. May this friend of mine be happy and free from suffering. And put this person right in front of our face and focus all our strength, our mental strength to this person. And let us pervade ourselves with loving kindness. And this is the practice of loving kindness. And I wish you a very happy life and a very successful conference. Thank you.
On February the 1st, 1981, Metropolitan Interdenominational Church was birthed as a congregation committed to being inclusive of all and alienating to none, leading the way to spiritual growth by sharing God's love with the world. Little did we know, 4 months later, HIV would be identified by the Centers for Disease Control as a virus that was spreading rapidly across these United States of America and around the world. We never could have imagined that 2.5 years later, the first person to die in the history of our congregation would be a person whose life became compromised as a result of his immune system being compromised by this virus. When it occurred, it was difficult for us to wrap our minds around, because indeed, from that perspective at that particular time, it was not generally thought that it was a disease that had the level of impact or presence in communities like those which were predominantly found to be a part of the Metropolitan Church family. When we began to talk about this reality in a way that suggested our insistence upon responding in a fashion that we thought was appropriate for a faith community, we decided that one of the things we had to do was begin to educate ourselves. The education experience evolved into one where we began to do specific initiatives around the whole business of prevention. Then after prevention, we began to do things that represented social services. And then later, by the beginning of the 1990s, we began to do work around treatment and care, and eventually decided that we would establish a clinic that would be a part of the ministry of our congregation. As we found ourselves being increasingly involved and more visibly noted in doing so within our community, we found that there were those who had concern as to what it meant for a congregation that was a part of the Judeo-Christian tradition, which in too many instances found itself not being ready, prepared, or in a mindset that was receptive to how it is that this was a cause and this was an issue that we needed to address. When it was simply a matter of that which was the other, of those who were on the other side of the world, it was probably one that the traditional missionary mentality lent itself to responding to. But when it came down to being the person next door, the person in the community, the person in the city and the state and the country of these United States, we found that there was a greater reluctance and even a fear factor that began to take over in a fashion that created sometimes a level of public hysteria that was not warranted at the level that it was being manifest, but at the same time not understood, because of the way in which there were too many who had no appreciation for how it is that the susceptibility of each and every one of us was inescapable if indeed we were not aware of precautionary methods and strategies that we needed to take in order to make sure that we were making the backdrop of a community and an environment that would be less susceptible to the way in which this disease was manifesting itself. We also found ourselves in a situation very early on when we were a part of just a handful of congregations that were willing to step forward and say that this was a cause, that this was an issue, that this was a ministry that we needed to take up. And if indeed we were going to be faithful to the tradition in which we had built our congregation, we knew that it was going to be important to sometimes go against the grain in terms of how the issues of acceptability were going to have to be dealt with. Over time, we found ourselves being pointed out and identified in ways that were, in many instances, unsettling and definitely not appropriate in terms of what should be the case if indeed there had been a more comprehensive appreciation of what was going on in these times in which we lived. But then there was the moment also when there was a sense of stigma that came associated with our congregation. Initially, it was referred to as being the AIDS church, and then because of our commitment to dealing with other ways in which the viability of fullness of opportunity in life was being manifest in our midst, we find ourselves responding to other issues that for us were social justice issues, including the crack epidemic and the ways in which other communicable diseases seemed to have a disproportionate impact amongst the community that we were most often identified with, and in reality were most often aligned with in terms of who we were because of the way in which the complexity of the presence and the diversity of those who were in our worshiping and faith settings was such that it was hard to embrace and for others to understand. It also ended up being a very difficult issue because of for many people, it became synonymous with the whole question of same-gender loving people, assuming positions of willingness to be affirming and to be welcoming and to be celebratory of indeed who they were in a way that needed to be respected and needed to be fully understood, where in many instances there was not a level of open-mindedness that had made room for this to occur. We found ourselves in those times being referred to as a congregation that perhaps had lost its way. in terms of not being conforming to the ways in which the mainstream of the Christian church was addressing and responding to this new dynamic that was a part of life in all of our communities. But what we discovered over time is even though initially there were people who were skeptical, there were people who were reluctant, there were people who were fearful, there were people who were not willing to quickly come and identify with the work we were doing and the way in which we were doing it. But over time, what we discovered is that though we did not necessarily quickly change all of the minds, many of the minds around us, we found ourselves increasingly becoming a community of believers that was respected. But respected, as it turned out, not just to be in Nashville, Tennessee, but the way in which the uniqueness of who we were, which represented only a handful of congregations across these United States, there's a way in which we found ourselves being identified with, turned to, and at least included in the conversations as they transpired. The conversations that often turned into debates, the conversations that also very often ended up being somewhat confrontational in terms of theological beliefs and positions and doctrinal positions within various churches. But we did over time discover that because of our willingness and our efforts to be thorough in our understanding and to be fully open to hearing and interacting with people who were dealing with their reluctances and their fears, we found ourselves winning the respect of many who did not fully agree, but yet they respected who we were and what we were doing. After all, what we were doing had to deal with and had to do with being able to save lives, being able to have a way to respond to this virus in a fashion that did not negate the whole business of being a reality that we could live with. At that point in time, early on, it was generally considered to be a death sentence, and we ended up being a part of the response, the compassionate response, the response of sensitivity, a response that was really built around our position that indeed every human being's life was of value, was of importance, and had meaning.
Trickling of water, the cries of the birds, the flickering of shadow, the roar of the wind. I can hear it saying, oh,
When everything went virtual in 2020, the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition launched a series of webinars called HIV and Faith in Resilience and Renewal. Since July of 2020, we've produced 13 webinars focusing on the narrative of faith engagement in the HIV response. The videos of these webinars, which can be found on the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition's YouTube channel, are a treasure trove of what we've learned over the 40 years of this epidemic, and the lessons faith leaders and faith communities need to carry forward to effectively fulfill our promise to end the HIV epidemic. Here now are some highlights from a few of those webinars, followed by some words of inspiration.
And reach our ultimate goal of ending stigma in faith communities. That's the main reason why we're doing this. People are not feeling safe in their faith community, don't feel welcome, they're feeling ostracized. So by having this awareness day and speaking out and holding our faith leaders accountable, talk about it from the pulpit or from the minibar or in their footballs or their Jumas and their sermons, it can really create that safe space you're looking for.
I'm very glad I did, because there's so many of us who want to come home. There's many of us who still want to come home, who want that safe place to be able to go and just be ourselves and to be embraced for who we are, inclusive of our HIV. Inclusive, because all people want to be accepted for all the things that they have, that they're going through. I know that some people do not feel safe enough. So
one of the common themes that I have heard today is that of oneness, that of togetherness.
And I will look forward to collaborate with you all in the future, and we can together will create this inclusiveness.
As this reality of this day has evolved, is the momentum that has been built over the years, and the way in which there has been an openness to so many from different faith traditions to feel that this was an opportunity that they wanted to avail themselves of and to be a part.
Simple accommodations such as the use of non-gender language, equitable access to gender-neutral bathrooms, naming transgender concerns in prayers and sermons are important ways of expressing welcome to transgender persons. The pastoral needs of transgender congregants might involve any of these issues, but among their first concerns may be whether they feel at home in your faith community. To give you a picture of how HIV impacts the transgender community, a 2019 systematic review and meta-analysis found that an estimated 14% of transgender women are living with HIV.
I had a lot of trauma growing up within faith spaces, and I was able to come back into faith spaces as an adult, not necessarily because I'm invested in the survival of religious institutions, but because I'm invested in the spirit of especially Black trans people and our rights to understanding our divinity, our rights to life, our rights to access to care.
And Unitarian Universalism is a faith that is publicly accepting, that ordains transgender ministers and musicians and administrators and religious educators, and yet we don't respond well at all.
I do want to say that a part of my reason for choosing to be a UU minister, my first questions was, how do they feel about kink? Because I was afraid there might be some photos floating out there somewhere in the world that could come up. And I was like, are they going to excommunicate? Are they going to kick me out? Are they going to take my stole if they find these pictures? And so I heard that UU had a whole kink.
Now y'all know why I work here.
And then I was like, and then I was also, I was married at the time and I identified as poly, and I was like, how do they feel about that? Like, are they going to kick me out? Am I going to lose? And when I heard that UU also had a poly crew, so they was all for trans, all for queer folks, I was like, this is a liberating faith.
And so for me, faith and science are very much so one and the same in terms of the end goal. And that's what helps me to be able to continue to do this work faithfully, knowing that my faith doesn't have to compromise my science, and my science doesn't have to compromise my faith, because the end goal is the same.
I know a lot of people have have, you know, they're concerned about vaccines. And I understand it, rightfully so. Through the history of our communities with, you know, Tuskegee, all these different things, I understand people's hesitation. But I think education is also very, very important, and see how far science has come and how far we have advanced, and bringing someone who can talk to people about vaccines, answer their questions for them, you know.
COVID and HIV notwithstanding, you know, we have other illnesses that have and continue to impact our country. And if we don't deal with that divide of otherness that pervades our society, the divide of not necessarily operating in the best interest of our neighbors, but just the best interest of ourselves. We have to begin to heal those divides before we can even talk about, you know, COVID-19 or HIV and AIDS.
And the Muslim tradition, our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said, tie your camel and then do what you have to do. Like, I mean, I'm obviously like paraphrasing it.
Yeah.
So basically, you know, first tie your camel and then trust in Allah. So tie your camel, which means learn about COVID, learn about the prevention, and implement those prevention methods, and then trust in God. Don't just sit there trust in God and think everything's gonna happen. You have to actually do the work.
There's been a massive amount of resources and, you know, coordination at the federal level, at the global level, to respond to COVID-19 in ways that we have not seen in HIV, and dollar amounts that we have not seen in HIV. So I think that this is an opportunity to pivot and to take lessons learned from the COVID-19 response and work to apply them to an HIV vaccine response as well.
You know, even seen with the HIV epidemic, we still see a large proportionate of burden with people of color suffering from HIV.
Our books are archaic. They are not only not addressing HIV as an infectious disease, they are not, PrEP is not even found on those pages. So the HIV treatment is not on those pages. And so we are educating decades of young people who move into the world, into colleges and into the workforce, who are totally oblivious to the realities of this, including STDs.
You know, COVID-19, we've been able to draw on the community engagement paradigms that were established for HIV, and that's good.
We have to go back and revitalize our conversations around HIV from a faith perspective, because.
But I think I need to say it out loud that we as faith leaders need to be strong as AIDS advocates. AIDS is not over. And I was just in New York City for another aspect of my life, and someone asked me what I do, and their response was, I thought we cured that. So we need renewed, as Khadija just said, videos. We have got to get this out there that AIDS is not over.
And I think that faith communities can really have an opportunity to reach those people who've been unreached by messages of anti-discrimination, anti-stigma, unreached by the messages of the medical advances that mean that people living with HIV can live full lives, can have healthy babies, can have relationships where no HIV transmission occurs. And within faith communities, there are a lot of people who haven't heard this new information, much of it very good news.
They influence the attitudes not just of their members, but also of the wider community. So if there is a sufficient amount of this, of messaging within the faith communities, it spreads the whole community. And that's the leverage point, a leverage point that we have that seems like it'll be critical to take advantage of if we're going to hit those 10-10-10 targets.
Faith communities do a tremendous amount of work in the HIV response in many, many places. And the more that they can elevate the voices of people living with HIV, the voices of key populations, those who are most affected by HIV, and really ensure that those faith responses are centering and led by, it can be people living with HIV from their own faith communities, because they're the ones who we know just what's needed.
Faith sector has two mission statements, the in-reach and the outreach. And the in-reach is really, practical action on the ground in the faith communities and the congregations, whereas the outreach is the advocacy arm. And once we do both of them well, we will do our part.
They bring a moral dimension, a dimension. So this is a moral imperative to end AIDS.
Yeah.
It's and that to me is sort of the strength that all faith communities bring, and that happens at the national level and it happens at the local levels.
We took the tough option of bringing in everyone because we realized that stigma is stigma, irrespective of whether you are a sheikh or a Hindu priest or an imam or a priest like Gideon. Blame each other less, listen to each other and empathize with each other deeper so that you are able to support and accompany and engage each other better.
Yes, like that gets us nowhere and we're blaming each other. We need to support each other because this is the only way we can move forward is together.
Community, that English word that comes from common unity. It's really easy to figure out how we disagree in theology or ethics or morality, but we're going to end HIV when we look at our common unity. And I think some of that gets us to the why we're doing these things. And it's what Gideon, also mentioned. It's our ethical tradition, both within religious communities and with people that don't have an explicit faith or religion, how we emphasize human dignity, the common good, the right of every person for health and life and human decency.
I'm Jesse Milan, CEO at AIDS United. I'm also a lifelong Episcopalian. And at the end of every Eucharist in our church, we stand and the congregation says together, "Now, Father, send us out in strength and courage to do the work you have given us to do, to love and serve you as faithful witnesses." I get inspired every time I say those words. Go out in strength and courage to love and serve and do the work you have given us to do. For so much of the first decades of HIV, we as people of faith did the work of going out to bring people in. We invited people in for healing services for AIDS. We invited people in for HIV education. We invited people in for memorial services and funerals. And our witness through those services showed the world that people of faith were not afraid of AIDS. It was great and transformative work. But while our buildings and sanctuaries represented the loving safety that people of faith hope to embody, our work today is not solely about inviting people in. Our work is about going out with strength and courage to do the work outside that people like me who are living with HIV and the millions who are vulnerable to HIV need us to do. People living with HIV need us to show our love by reducing stigma, not just by statements in our pulpits and prayers in our pews, but by doing the courageous work of speaking up and calling out injustice in workplaces, in businesses, and homes where stigma and discrimination are still very deep. People living with HIV and vulnerable to HIV need us to show our strength and courage in states where HIV criminal laws still exist and Medicaid access is still denied. They need us to be brave in addressing trans rights and voting rights and reproductive rights, and to promote sexual health education in every school district, whether red or blue. They need us to not be afraid to ask Congress for money or to promote the importance of syringe service programs or to share the truthful good news of U equal U. And our people need us to encourage access to PrEP and to be strong in encouraging our people to get vaccinated for COVID-19 too. These acts of love and service may feel very different from the healing and memorial services of our past, but they are the work of fighting inequities and fighting the problems and barriers that are needed to come down if we are to truly assure that our people have the prevention, the treatment, and the care that they need, and the rights and the dignity that they deserve. These acts of love and service, especially in this political environment, require strength and courage. So as I reflect over the past 40 years of HIV, I've learned that addressing the politics and the issues that keep people from knowing their status, from being in care, that can keep people from achieving viral suppression and aging healthily, and the issues that could keep people from ever acquiring HIV require that we not simply pray, because they won't be prayed away alone. They require work. And now more than ever, that work is beyond our buildings and our walls. That work requires us to go out with strength and courage. And as people of faith, we should have nothing to fear when we do, because we know who is on our side and we know who will be our guide. Amen.
Greeting, faithful friends. I'm Rabbi Denise Ager, Senior Rabbi of Congregation Kolami in West Hollywood, California, and a past president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. As we continue to mark this 40th anniversary of the first CDC report on AIDS, we recall that we have learned so much. We have learned about our strength and our resilience. We've learned about building communities of caring. We've learned that science matters, and bigotry and hatred have no place in shaping public policy. We've learned to protest and become advocates for our health and those of our loved ones. And we've learned to demand more of our doctors and nurses and caretakers and the entire medical profession to provide culturally sensitive care. And we've learned to demand government address our concerns. We've learned to use our voice. We've learned to take risks for our health and at the same time minimize risks by educating for safer sex. We've learned to value life and its preciousness even more in the face of death. And we have learned to rely on our faith to sustain us in ways we might never have imagined. For those of us who particularly remember the earliest years of the AIDS pandemic, we haven't forgotten those who died too young or who died because they didn't get or have treatments. As we say in Jewish tradition, may their memories be a blessing. This year, World AIDS Day falls on the third day of the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. The word Hanukkah means rededication. The ancient Maccabees, a tiny band of Jewish leaders, fought the oppression and anti-Semitism of the Syrian Greeks who controlled the area. They had the mightiest army of the ancient world. And the Maccabees fought a 3-year war against them, reclaimed the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. They cleaned it and rededicated to their God from the desecration of its holy chambers by the occupying army. They rekindled the ancient golden lampstand known as the menorah. Let us rededicate our efforts to shine the light of love, of knowledge and compassion and healing to all who have been affected by HIV, and let that light shine out and renew our faith and work towards a cure for AIDS.
We have been living with this epidemic for 40 years. I have been thriving with HIV for 26 years. Our day-to-day living with HIV has been improved with improved ARTs and campaigns like U equals U. Now that we have injectables for treatment of HIV, we have seen new prevention programs that have cut the number of new infection rates. We have also learned to be better partners with our healthcare providers. The state of the epidemic. We still have stigma and discrimination for people living with HIV. In some parts of the world, we still have criminalization. We need to work to remove such laws. Together, we can make these advancements. We still need a cure. Remember all the lives that were cut short around the world and the United States. We celebrate those living a more productive day with HIV and cry for those that don't have access to our updated toolbox. This year's theme, World AIDS Day 2021, has the theme of global solidarity and shared responsibility. My prayers for the World AIDS Day is for us to work together to end this epidemic.
Since the beginning of the AIDS epidemic 40 years ago, faith-based institutions and communities of faith have been a cornerstone of the response to the disease. As first responders, as caregivers in the broadest sense of the word, as teachers, as preachers, as service providers, faith-based leaders and the faithful have been a constant in eliminating suffering and bringing hope and healing to those in the face of despair. The faith community has been and remains an essential partner in the great progress that we have made in the fight against HIV, and will remain an essential partner as we push on to end AIDS as we know it. What we have come to understand in our collective work in HIV is that we simply can't be successful in reaching our targets without community engagement and relationships of trust and knowledge that faith leaders and faith communities provide. My hope and prayer for this World AIDS Day in particular is that as we face yet another epidemic in COVID, that we learn from our experiences in HIV, that we win or lose our battles against these diseases at the ground level in communities, often disenfranchised communities, and we must rely on our faith-based partners from the very start to reach those most vulnerable with information and support that they need to weather the storm. Science and medicine are critical, and we must have them, of course, to manage these diseases. But we also must remember that the benefits of science and vaccines and medicines don't do us any good if they don't reach all who need them. That's another lesson that I hope we learn from HIV. That giving medicine and care to a few will never end the disease. We must reach all who are in need. Thank you very much.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
If I can, let me paint this picture. This picture is for those that believe, for those who have the faith to see the unseen, for those who have lost dreams, for those whose souls bleed. You see, it doesn't matter if they don't see what you're looking at. We understand how you must move, we understand how you must groove, we understand your soul must be let loose, it must live. Like tapping feet, the blues, dance to that offbeat. Don't let them cut your feet in them off streets. Yeah, this is to those who believe. It's okay to admit you don't know all the answers, but this we do know. We understand that we must embrace pain to let our beings grow. We understand these words we speak are engraved in our souls. They are written in bold with ink that is in the blood of our veins. Strong as the root in our trees, sturdy as the wood in our canes, cleansing as our tears after the pain, bright as the sun after the rain. It is our hope that things will get better. To those that believe, It doesn't matter what we seen or what we heard. We understand that these words concur with what we believe in. It is the perspective that we see, and they are far more than words you hear speaking. Is the very truth from our souls leaking. Is in what we hold, is in the very folds in our skin. Little brown boy, I want you to know it's strategically placed in your melanin. And even if time stops, we'll keep moving. If the clock ends, we'll keep moving. Even if the air's thin, we'll still dance like we can't breathe. You see, this is a weapon that you cannot sheathe. This is to those who believe. This is proof your mind and body is a weapon. It is no curse of Ham, it is pure blessing. It was in the ships we were left in, is in the eyes of our peers we left guessing. It's in the very gritting of our knees, our mothers we left stressing. It's in the pure will that kept us pressing. It's in the doubt of our second guessing. To those who believe, I want you to know, it's in the way we flex, it's in the way we say more with less, it's in the way we move like games of chess, it's in the way we sing from our souls, not our chests, it's the way we don't rest, it's the way we've been blessed, it's the way we don't take no, we turn into a yes. It's the way we refuse to no longer second guess. To those who believe, this is what we believe in. And it's us. It's us.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ulysses Burley, founder of You Be the Cure, LLC, an organization that operates at the intersection of faith, health, and human rights with expertise in HIV and AIDS. I'm also a proud co-founder of the United States HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition, and it is my pleasure to present to you the State of the Epidemic and Faith Response, sponsored by the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. It's difficult to imagine a world without HIV, considering we are in the 40th year since HIV was identified in 1981. Yet in order for us to imagine a world without HIV, we have to better understand the world with HIV. And that's a world that has long been ravaged by a history of pandemics, including the COVID-19 pandemic that continues to live with us and continues to complicate our progress as it relates to HIV and AIDS, which is yet and still the deadliest pandemic of our generation. In 2020, there were 37 million people living with HIV, 1.5 million of which were newly infected in 2020. And of that, 680,000 people died from HIV-related causes in the same year. Of the 37 million people currently living with HIV, 28 million of those people are accessing antiretroviral therapy as of June 30th, 2021, which is a significant increase from years past, yet still leaves more than 10 million people without access to life-saving antiretroviral therapies, many of which are children and women. Likewise, the COVID-19 pandemic has further stifled the progress that we have made over the years in HIV and AIDS. We know that people living with HIV experience more severe outcomes and have higher comorbidities from COVID-19 than people not living with HIV. And then most people living with HIV did not have access to COVID-19 vaccines and continue not to have access to those vaccines, where risk of dying from COVID-19 among people living with HIV is twice that of the general population. While 67% of people living with HIV reside in sub-Saharan Africa, less than 3% of people in Africa had received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine as of July 2021. This lack of accessibility is largely due to COVID-19 lockdowns and other restrictions, supply chain issues, and really just geopolitical, socioeconomic circumstances that have further disrupted HIV testing, leading to steep drops in diagnoses and referrals to HIV treatment. According to data collected across African and Asian countries, we know that HIV testing declined by 41%, and referrals for diagnosis and treatment declined by 37% during the first COVID-19 lockdowns in early 2020 when compared with the same period in 2019. And so while it's yet to be seen what the damage might be as it relates to COVID-19 and our progress with HIV and AIDS, we know that damage has been done, and there will be work that will need to be done to make up the gains that were lost in the midst of these dueling pandemics. Despite the fact that the United States has the best public health infrastructure for preparing for a pandemic, we had the worst COVID-19 experience in terms of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, as well as we continue to be in the top 10 countries with the greatest number of people living with HIV in the world, the only high-income country in that number. And so you can imagine that COVID-19 has impacted our HIV and AIDS efforts in the United States as well. But before COVID-19, in 2019, there were an estimated 1.2 million people living with HIV. For every 100 people living with HIV, 87 of them knew their HIV status, with 13% of people living with HIV not knowing their status. Likewise, of the people living with HIV, out of every 100 adults and adolescents, 76 were receiving some form of HIV care, 58 were retained in care, and 66 were virally suppressed. We'll talk more about the importance of viral suppression in a minute. The number of new HIV diagnoses was the highest among people aged 25 to 34, and Black and Latinx people continue to be disproportionately affected by HIV, namely Black and Latinx gay and bisexual men who have sex with men in the United States. Likewise, the highest rates of new HIV diagnoses were mainly in the southern region of the United States, where a majority of our country's Black population resides, as well as people who identify as LGBTQIA. Therefore, the Ending the HIV Epidemic Plan for America has specifically targeted the 48 highest burden counties, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, but also including 7 states with substantial rural HIV burden, 6 of the 7 being in the southern region of the United States. And the goal of the Ending the Epidemic plan is to achieve 75% reduction in new HIV infections by 2025 and at least 90% reduction by 2030 by diagnosing all individuals with HIV as early as possible after infection, then treating the infection rapidly and effectively after diagnosis, achieving sustained viral suppression, and making sure we continue to prevent new HIV transmissions by using proven interventions, including PrEP and syringe service programs. Then we must respond rapidly to detect and respond to growing HIV clusters and prevent new HIV infections. To imagine a world without HIV, we have to imagine a world where treatment and prevention are accessible to all living with HIV and those who are vulnerable to HIV infection. And I want to first talk about the various treatment modalities that are currently available to people living with HIV. As of this year, these are the single pill regimens that are available to people living with HIV. It's really quite the medical miracle, considering that early in the pandemic, people had to take as many as 30 pills a day just to stay alive and healthy, living with HIV and AIDS. And now people can take 1 pill daily as combination therapy and expect to live the same life expectancy as any other person not living with HIV. Granted, they continue to have uninterrupted access to those antiretroviral therapies. Also, for the first time
this year, the FDA has approved long-acting injectable HIV therapies, namely the combination therapy of cabotegravir and rilpivirine. And this will certainly help us address issues of adherence, but also issues of internalized stigma, where the routine of having to take a pill once daily might remind someone of their status. And so the ability to be able to take a shot that will protect you from the HIV that lives within one's body for up to 2 weeks becomes a significant milestone in our efforts to continue to normalize HIV treatment and make it as accessible and effective as possible for people living with HIV. Likewise, in the midst of novel antiretroviral therapy treatments, there have also been new introductions for pre-exposure prophylaxis, adding to the repertoire of Truvada. We now have access to Descovy, which gives people another option for protecting themselves and their loved ones from HIV transmission. And so this particular chart is the benefit of biomedical research, and it has given us the concept of treatment as prevention, where we know that if you are durably virologically suppressed, you will not transmit HIV to your partner, and you yourself can remain healthy with an undetectable viral load. We know that a person living with HIV who has an undetectable viral load does not transmit the virus to their partner. And that is significant in our quest to end HIV and AIDS as a public health crisis. And that the ability for one to have access to consistent, effective treatment not only reduces their likelihood of illness, but it almost with 100% certainty prevents them from transmitting HIV to their loved ones, which helps us to minimize the amount of new infections on an annual basis. So then, a world without HIV is not only a world with treatment, but also a world with prevention, where treatment acts as prevention, but also where we continue to do research to provide alternatives for delivery of novel biomedical prevention mechanisms for HIV and AIDS, namely pre-exposure prophylaxis, which prevents HIV transmission in persons who are HIV negative, but who might be more vulnerable for HIV infection. And even as the FDA has approved long-acting injectable antiretroviral treatments, there are currently studies that are in progress for injectable PrEP as well, such that we can again increase the options for persons to be able to prevent transmission. The issue then continues not to be the biomedical research or the science, but it continues to be the social determinants of health, if you will, those social constructs that impact one's access to healthcare, and in this case, their access to prevention mechanisms like PrEP. We know that the people who need PrEP the most still aren't accessing PrEP as they need it. And so in this case, a world without HIV is not simply a world with science that treats HIV or prevents HIV, but it's a world without stigmatization and a world with justice for all people impacted by HIV. And this is where faith communities can really play a significant role. HIV is indeed a medical disease, but it's also a moral mandate in that it's a social justice issue because it tends to impact the most marginalized people in society. And so faith communities have historically advocated for the least of these, and therefore should also advocate for people living with and people affected by HIV and AIDS. That's why the HIV Vaccine Trials Network has embarked upon a faith initiative expanding an effort that was established and co-founded by the Reverend Edwin Sanders and Wakefield of the HIV Vaccine Trial Network many years ago to establish relationships with faith communities and the scientific community such that faith communities could have access to correct and factual and culturally competent biomedical and scientific education and information as it relates to HIV research and development. The HVTN has since expanded the faith initiative that has launched today on this World AIDS Day and will be led by myself as the program director. The HVTN Faith Initiative will feature 8 faith ambassadors that are geographically distributed around the country who possess the competency and capacity to speak to these intersections of HIV and faith. And they will in turn recruit up to 56 faith consultants around the country, where together they will host HIV and COVID-19 focused events that offer education and information to everyday people such that they can make informed decisions about their health as it relates to HIV, but also as it continues to relate to COVID-19 that remains with us. These ambassadors cover the Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, Buddhist, and Native and Indigenous faith traditions, but also reach beyond those traditions to engage Jewish and Sikhs and Hindus and other faith traditions and expressions. And so we really look forward to the opportunity to be able to speak more to these intersections of the science and the sacred, and why it's important for faith communities to be engaged in HIV and AIDS prevention, treatment, and care. I thank you, and I welcome any questions that you might have. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us for this important forum on this important day. There's not nearly enough time to communicate all of the updates that have happened as it relates to HIV and AIDS over this 40-year period. But we wanted to offer just a snapshot, if you will, of the state of the epidemic, both globally and nationally here in the United States, and the ways in which faith communities, faith organizations, faith actors are organizing to make sure that faith communities play a significant role in ending the HIV epidemic as a public health crisis. This very forum today is an example of a faith organization operating at the intersection of social justice, human rights, and HIV and AIDS in the United States HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition. And I'm thankful to be joined with my colleague, Terrell Jackson of the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, who has a long legacy and history of community engagement, and particularly faith engagement, understanding that people's belief systems play a significant role in the decisions that we make about our health and our wellness. And so if there are any lingering questions as a result of this brief presentation, please feel free to ask them. And if there are not, then we invite you to enjoy the rest of our program. For those of you who might want to ask a question more privately, Terrell and I will enter our email addresses in the chat, and you are welcome to engage us in that way. Also, I did see comments come through relative to some of the content that was shared that might not have been easily visible. And so if you would be interested in the slide deck that was just presented, we can absolutely send those to you as well. And so Terrell and I are going to drop our email addresses in the chat, and we will proceed with our program if there are no burning questions.
Child, you gotta keep the body you have alive. Child, you gotta keep the body you have alive. Love it, keep it strong. Be wise and survive. Child, you gotta keep the body you have alive. Child, you gotta keep the soul you've got whole. Child, you've gotta keep the soul you've got whole. Oppression will tear it apart, so root in what makes you grow. Child, you gotta keep the soul you've got whole. And you will never be alone when you do. Your ancestors, your God, are holding you. And for as long as I can, I'll be here too. Child, you gotta protect the air you're gonna breathe. Child, you gotta protect the air you're gonna breathe. Water is life and sacred the fight, to remember we are dust and light. Child, you gotta protect the air you're gonna breathe. And you will never be alone when you do. Your ancestors, your God, are holding you. And for as long as I can, I'll be here too. For as long as I can, I'll be here too. For as long as I can, I'll be here too. Child, you gotta build the world you want to live in. joy and for love. Child, you gotta build the world you want to live in.
Let us join voices at this moment of boldness, empowerment, and remembrance on World AIDS Day. As we have shared our lamentations and celebrations, we are reminded, as members of the beloved community, that we are called to boldly proclaim the human rights of people living with or affected by HIV/AIDS.
We take this moment to pray for a cure, even as we remember the millions who have died from this disease.
We take this moment to lift up the millions of adults, young people, and children of every gender living with HIV who suffer the misguided judgments of a world that would shun them and shame them.
We take this moment to give thanks for the transformative power of God's Spirit.
The divine Spirit empowers us to break the shackles of apathy, ignorance, and condemnation so that we are able to provide healing for the sick, comfort for the troubled, and hope for the forsaken.
God's Spirit emboldens us to love unflinchingly, to share unconditionally, and to serve unreservedly.
May it be so.
As we are gathered here today digitally, I am so clear that we're all aware that COVID-19 is not the only global pandemic that we've circumvented in our lifetimes. And that for those of us in this digital space, in this world, that have been impacted directly by HIV and AIDS, have continued to be at the forefront of understanding interdependence, of creating new models of care, of transforming a future in which people are able to be witnessed, lean into their dignity, and be cared for. For those of you that don't know me, my name is J. Mace III. You can call me Mace or J. Mace for short. I use he, him as pronouns. And I'm the co-director of a organization as well as an upcoming film called The Black Trans Prayer Book, which is also its own little book situation. And what that means, honestly, is I've been spending a lot of my time and my passion supporting and centering other Black trans folks, especially at this intersections of spirituality and deconstructing religious violence. In this world that is so anti-Black, that is so anti-trans, that is so trans-antagonistic, we have called ourselves into being. We have manifested and ordained ourselves into this world, right? And there is no word in English to really talk about that relationship between our transness and our Blackness and what it means for us to be resistors to white supremacy, to colonization, to systems of oppression merely by existing. And so today what I want to share with y'all is a poem that for me is my favorite Quran story, my favorite Bible story. This is the story of Joseph of Genesis in the Bible, story of Yusuf in the Quran. And if you don't read neither of those books, this is the story of Yusuf in the Technicolor Dreamcoat as told by Broadway. And I'm just hoping that this is useful to you as we, again, center those of us in community that have been at the forefront of care and witnessing each other. She asks if she can talk to me about Jesus at 3 a.m. on the C train because something about my trans face means clearly I'm on a path straight to hell. I've come to expect this type of reaction from strangers at least once a week since the first time I was exercised at 16. But today I've grown tired and I've decided it is my turn to proselytize. So before you do any of that, I want to know from you. Have you heard the good word about Joseph of Genesis? See, Josephine, Joe of Genesis, favorite child of Jacob, aka Israel. When asked what you wanted, you desired one thing, a ketoneth pasim. Pastor called this a royal coat, and Joe, I had never read the Bible before, found you and kept reading. Josephine, I got to 2 Samuel, realized your coat of many colors was a princess dress. Joe, your father must have really loved you, because he got it for you and you wore it with pride. Joe, when your brothers saw you, they became enraged. I am sorry for the beating you received. Sorry that they destroyed your dress and smeared it with the red paint of your swollen veins. Josephine, did you know they told your father you were dead? So he never come looking for you. Never knew your brother sold you as a slave into Egypt. And once you were stolen from your home fields, the earth dried up. Joe, the very ground on which you walked, mourned the loss of its genderqueer child. And all the plants died. And the animals no longer had the will to live. Josephine, your family nearly starved. Saw the formation of ribs where once there grew flesh and belly fat, and they, hungry and desperate, traveled into Egypt. And what must they have seen, Joe? Seen Egypt. People discovered you. Not as just gay, not as just trans. They saw you in totality. You went from slave to leader over lands. There you were, Josephine, as you, as magnificent, and your family couldn't even recognize you through the glare of divinity, but you saw them, shivering in fear, waiting to hear what this regal leader might say, wondering if your spirit might see fit to grant them the grain needed to survive. And Joseph's love broke through the darkness of resentment, and for the first time, your family saw you, as magnificent. For it was your word that saved them from starvation, dear Joseph of Genesis, aka Josephine, aka Joe. I'm claiming your story for every trans kid told that we're unholy. I'm claiming your story for every queer told that in order to love, we must let our faith die. I'm going to put it in a pocket over my heart, next to Ruth and Naomi, next to David and Jonathan, next to Haggai and Deborah, and seat them at the last Passover with Jesus and Lazarus. Yes, I'm taking Jesus with me too, dear pastor. To you, who claims your words are from God, but whose book has been pledged to King James, know what allegiances you keep. We have been lying about my people for too long. Thank you.
As individuals, faith and spiritual leaders, representatives of communities and organizations of diverse faith traditions, we believe that the respect of human dignity and the value of human life is fundamental to each of our religions. We share a belief in the inherent value and worth of all human beings, a conviction that each person is a powerful agent of change, reflects the divine, and must be treated with dignity and respect. A commitment to relieve human suffering. a responsibility to reach out and respond to people who experience marginalization and to protect people who are vulnerable. We believe that these values constitute the foundation for equitable and effective public health systems, for the provision of HIV services, as well as the services for all other diseases, such as COVID-19, TB, and malaria.
Ensuring that HIV-positive people and children have access to optimal ARVs, remain on treatment, adhere to it, and have their viral load suppressed is key to the global effort to end AIDS as a public health threat. The 12 Million campaign is engaging faith leaders, individuals, and communities to promote access to health services to the 12 million children, women, and men living with HIV who are not yet on antiretroviral treatment.
Good evening, good morning. My name is Canon Gideon Byamugisha, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Rabbi Denise Eger, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Reverend Mike Schenemeyer, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Tiana Webb, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Sagalananda, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Dr. David Barstow, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Ayoko Bahun Wilson, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Elder George Kerr, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Dr. Ulysses Burley, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
I'm Dr. Stuart Keane. I wholeheartedly support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Sandy Thurman, and I personally support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Nkapa Njeru, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Rabbi Marisa Ilana James, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Manoj Kurian, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
I'm the Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson, and I support the 12 Million campaign.
My name is Father Rick Bauer. I strongly support the 12 Million campaign to ensure that everyone living with HIV can have a long and healthy life.
By working together, mobilizing action, and creating awareness about the 12 million people living with HIV who have not yet access to treatment, we can truly end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030.
Compelled by our shared values, we commit to urgently taking significant and sustained actions in the following areas during the next 10 years. 1, increase access to HIV prevention, treatment, care, and support. 2, promote the human rights and dignity of all people. 3, address HIV stigma and discrimination. And 4, build bridges of collaboration among different faiths, as well as between faiths and non-faith actors.
As unique individuals and organizations, we each commit to using our gifts and strengths to ensure a focused and holistic faith response to HIV.
I commit to exercising stronger,
more visible,
and practical leadership
in the response to HIV.
I commit to being mutually accountable.
I commit to being mutually accountable.
I commit to being mutually accountable for.
I commit to being mutually accountable
for contributing to the achievement of the 2025 HIV targets.
I commit to being well informed about the HIV epidemic.
I commit to being well informed about the HIV epidemic.
I commit to being well informed about the HIV epidemic.
I commit to being well informed about the HIV epidemic,
including the latest evidence-based methods of prevention, testing, and treatment.
I commit to engaging meaningfully.
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 I commit to engaging meaningfully
with people living with HIV and at-risk populations.
I commit to promoting universal access.
I commit to promoting universal access.
I commit to promoting universal access to
I commit to promoting universal access
to optimal diagnostic products and antiretrovirals, and to supporting retention, adherence, and viral load suppression of all people living with HIV.
I commit to listening to and engaging with adolescents and young people.
I commit to listening to and engaging with adolescents and young people.
I commit to listening and engaging with adolescents and young people.
I commit to listening to and engaging with adolescents and young people.
I commit to listening to and engaging with adolescents and young people.
I commit to listening to and engaging with adolescents and young people.
I commit to listening to and engaging with adolescents and young people.
I commit to promoting access to optimal diagnostic products and antiretrovirals for children, and to supporting retention, adherence, and viral load suppression of all children living with HIV.
In a true bio-psycho-social spiritual model of healthcare.
I commit to protect and uphold human rights.
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 I commit to eliminating stigma and discrimination.
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 I commit to eliminating stigma and discrimination
towards all people living with and affected by HIV, particularly those marginalized and key populations.
I commit to working with governments
to engage national and local religious leaders and faith-based organizations
to support the development and implementation
of national multi-faith HIV action plans.
I commit to building the capacity of faith communities.
I commit to building the capacity of faith communities.
I commit to building capacity of faith communities.
I commit to building the capacity of faith communities.
I commit to building the capacity of faith communities.
I commit to building the capacity of faith communities
by providing widespread training for local and national religious leaders.
I commit to identifying, gathering, organizing, and disseminating
interfaith best practices.
Interfaith best practices.
Interfaith best practices.
Interfaith best practice.
Interfaith best practices.
Interfaith best practices.
Interfaith best practices.
Interfaith best practices for the faith response to HIV.
I commit to mitigating the impact of COVID-19
in our faith communities and places of worship,
and to call for equitable access
to approved COVID-19 vaccines.
I commit to being a strong advocate.
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 So help me God.
And together,
we commit to achieving our goals through collaboration.
As people of faith, we commit to do our part to help to achieve the 2025 targets and to eliminate AIDS as a public health threat by 2030, God willing. And we invite others to join us.
Good afternoon. Well, my name is Bishop Yvette Flunder, and I am thrilled to be a part of this conversation. After 30 plus years in the fight to end HIV and AIDS, I know epidemics and pandemics are not racist or homophobic. They're not religious, and they are not anti-religious. We cannot assign a pandemic to those who are marginalized by ethnicity or sexual orientation, beliefs, or economic strata. I echo the words of my colleagues. Our current atmosphere is prioritizing COVID. While HIV is not over, it is still a pandemic. This attitude of disproportionate attention to the pandemic du jour hinders our response to ending HIV. HIV is not over. Funding is not directed to HIV in proportion to the need. Let me begin again. Good afternoon, everyone. After 30 plus years in the fight to end HIV and AIDS, I know epidemics and pandemics are not racist or homophobic, religious or anti-religious. We cannot assign a pandemic to those who are marginalized by ethnicity or sexual orientation, beliefs, or economic strata. I echo the words of my colleagues. Our current atmosphere is prioritizing COVID, while HIV is not over. It is still a pandemic. This attitude of disproportionate attention to the pandemic du jour hinders our response to ending HIV. I am Bishop Yvette Flunder. And in the 30 plus years that I have done this work, I am clear, HIV is not over. Funding is not directed to HIV in proportion to the need, and underfunded health workers and programs are struggling. So today, we want to remember. We want to remember the survivors, remember those who served in the belly of the beast in the early years, HIV during the early years, those who died, their significant others, families, communities. We want to remember the survivors, remember the struggles, remember the pain, remember the victories. Do not let them disappear, even when funds are waning. The current pandemic response should not be an either or, but a both and response. Remember, we are in this place again. We have been in this place before. We create a pandemic by failing to respond because of judgment, bad religion, racism, politics, and now on World AIDS Day, Omicron has overshadowed its elder sibling, the pandemic of HIV. Take a moment now and speak the names of those we have lost. Speak the names of those who have served. Speak what you feel is needed to continue the fight against AIDS. What is your dream for a comprehensive model for a better world? Please feel free to put your comments in the chat. Please feel free to add your thoughts and opinions and feelings, passion, bereavement, pain, joy, expectation, while we together vision a better world. God bless you, and God bless all the souls of those who have departed and all of the souls of those who are still actively in the struggle. Thank you so very much. We see you. We hear you. We are sharing with one another. Our joys, our sorrows, our hopes. Continue to share. Thank you so much. I also am in awe of this presentation. And my memory is filled with names and faces. The struggles, the difficulty, and perhaps some of you, like me, go all the way back to the beginning. Some of you, like me, were the ones who laid down in caskets in front of decision-making moments in our cities, in our state, and in our nation. Perhaps you spent some time doing the work overseas in Africa, in Asia, in the work in cities, counties, and particularly the work with people of faith. Let's remember the great and gallant and powerful siblings that we lost in this epidemic. The children that we lost in this epidemic. The efforts that ended with providing funding to marginalized communities, and for the people of faith who stood strong and stand strong, would not allow this epidemic to be relegated to the anger of God against certain communities. Let's remember for a minute and let's celebrate those that made our achievements, which are many and are significant. Those achievements are remarkable, given how difficult it was to even get started and get going because of the negativity that existed around this. God bless all of those who we remember. I'd be in trouble trying to call all the names because I know I would miss someone. But we have giants whose shoulders that we stand on. And we have current leadership pushing forward to continue. This is World AIDS Day. Today is World AIDS Day. Today is World AIDS Day. Let's remember. Let's remember. In my tradition, the African American church, we sing a song that says, we've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord. That's trusting in God's holy word. God has never failed us yet. And then it moves to the refrain, oh, I can't turn around because we've come this far by faith. I encourage you, share your dreams, your vision, share your thoughts, your memories. Let's memorialize in this moment where we are. It's a bit of an Ebenezer. We've come this far by faith. We can mark this moment as we begin to go forward from this place. We can stop for a moment and reflect, raise our own Ebenezer and say, thus far, God and good has brought us. And here we are, my beloved. And here we are. And here we are. Deep love for my colleagues. Deep love for the leadership, for the folks that have stayed in the struggle, and deep love for those who have had to rest, regroup, reform, reconnect in other ways. We have fought together for a long time, and we're not done. There is still work to do. I pray, like you, that the day will come when things like race, bad religion, judgment, homophobia, transphobia, other nation phobia, that all of these realities will keep us from, or that keep us from being cohesive as humankind. I pray that these realities will be distanced from us completely as we together seek health and wholeness for ourselves and for our planet. We owe more to our children, both of the flesh and spirit. Continue to share, feel free. Continue to share. I hear you, we are here. We are here. We are here. I got you, Ulysses. This is the way the song goes. We have come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in God's holy word. I can hear a B3 organ in my ears. God never failed us yet. And I'm singing, oh, oh, can't turn around. We've come this far by faith. One more time. We have come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, and trusting in God's holy word. God never failed us yet. I'm singing, oh, oh, we can't turn around. We've come this far by faith. God bless you today. Good bless you today. Faith, bless you today. Hope, bless you today. Our love for one another, may love bless you today. And may you find strength for the days to come. God bless you. Amen and praise God.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Khadija, and I'm so happy you have joined us today. I am the founder of RAHMA, which means mercy in Arabic. It's also the acronym for Reaching All HIV-Positive Muslims in America, and also the founder of National Faith HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. And I'm so excited you're here today. I want to give you a background on why I became passionate about HIV and AIDS. When I was in college, I met a Muslim man living with AIDS. He had progressed to the AIDS stage, and I was studying to be a nurse at the time. And I worked in the hospital as a student nurse, and this man was my patient. And I learned so much from him. He told me how he felt stigmatized and not welcome in his own community because of the lack of education around HIV or AIDS. And the stigma he faced was so surreal. So he opened my eyes to what's going on. And I realized that I'd never actually had education on sexual health when I was growing up in my faith community, forget HIV or AIDS. And then I went back to my college campus, and I met a friend who also was positive and opened my eyes to that can affect people my age as well. So I kind of organized a World AIDS Day week of awareness back in when I was in college, and I can say the year. And it really got me passionate about this cause. So I continue on to volunteer. And I decided to start RAHMA to hopefully address HIV and AIDS in the Muslim community, but it has since grown to address HIV and AIDS, gender-based violence, female genital mutilation / cutting prevention in all faith communities. And we started Faith HIV/AIDS Awareness Day in 2017 because we realized that faith and HIV have a correlation, and unfortunately, people are stigmatized in faith communities on HIV and AIDS, and they leave their faith community because of lack of support, and many other reasons as well. So we kind of wanted to bring a light and shed light on that aspect. So today we're here celebrating World AIDS Day, and we're going to present to you a documentary short film on people of faith, of different faith backgrounds, sharing their stories about HIV and AIDS, called My Faith, My Story. And it kind of uplifts people from the South that are sharing their stories. I think it's really important that we listen to this and hear these perspectives, because it's very important that we uplift people of faith. So many times they're often forgotten, and I think it's great. I'm really excited for you to listen to it and watch it. I'd love to hear your feedback. Please, please, please share with your family and your friends. Let's work together to make a difference in the lives of those affected with HIV and AIDS, and also a part of faith community. So thank you so much. Enjoy this event and have a great evening, a great morning, a great weekend, and a great day celebrating World AIDS Day. Thank you. Bye.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the southern region of the United States makes up roughly 40% of the U.S. population, but accounts for 45% of all people living with HIV in the country, and 51% of new diagnoses, more than any other region. Pew Research reports that Black Americans are the most religious racial ethnic group in the U.S. This includes Black lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, or asexual, and persons living with HIV in the South who rely on their personal faith to navigate issues around health and wellness, but sometimes lack the support to safely explore the intersection between HIV and faith in their community. In partnership with Wake Forest University Gilead Campus Initiative, Southern AIDS Coalition, RAHMA, the United States Conference on HIV Faith Coalition, and National Faith HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, we invite you into a safe space for storytelling where advocates, faith leaders, and people living with HIV address the challenges inherent in responding to the HIV epidemic in the Southern U.S. as people and communities of faith.
I am more than my diagnosis. Coming from a Latino family, it was a huge shock for them.
Although you may think this is not happening in your congregation.
What I really hear from my brothers and sisters that are living with HIV is just wanting to be loved.
I didn't go to church for a while. I was really angry with pastors.
We as people of faith are all joined together now on this earth to deal with stigma of all kinds.
This is My Faith, My Story.
My faith, my story.
My faith, my story. My faith, my story.
Mi historia, mi fe.
My faith, my story.
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 His faith, his story.
We will speak with a common voice. We will walk hand in hand, and we will end AIDS.